Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is, wherever you're in the world, it is your Lore Saviour, and welcome to part 4 of the ongoing Chicago by Night 5th Edition game where I put my trio of queer autistic friends through Chicago by Night. Last time, we wrapped up the sacrifice where there was lots of spicy drama, and now Chicago by Night is opened up to the party a bit more. But that being said, we actually focused the entirety of the 4th session in one place. That place being, of course, the Abyss, the Lasombra players' club, which they inherited from their deceased sire, which has also now become one of the many Elysium spots within Chicago. So how did we start off? Well, as I mentioned in the previous recap, I made the sort of description saying that security and whatnot in the city is a bit tighter due to certain information that was revealed to the prince during the previous session. And the player sort of like felt a bit of that through the description. And to make that mechanically sound, rather than starting their hunger at 1, because remember there was a time jump of a month, their hunger started at 2, which turned out didn't actually impact them too much because they didn't really use any disciplines that sort of like roused the blood, as it were, although somebody's hunger did go up by 1 and then something really spicy happened, but we'll get on to that. But there wasn't much of an impact to them at this time. So after I'd given all that description, we had a bit of a chat about the stuff that had been happening in that month's jump. Obviously the Lasombra player had received the club from their side. They got it because they killed the sire, and Prince Kevin Jackson gave them that and all of the assets, which was somewhat generous of him. I laugh because I know exactly what's going to happen next, and so will you if you watched some of the spoiler stuff, which I know my players haven't been, so don't go back and watch them because you can't do that yet, please. So the Lasombra player got all of that. I made a point mentioning that they hadn't heard much from Crook. The stuff with Anita Wainwright's Haven hadn't happened yet for the reasons I mentioned in the spoiler section, which I'll get onto as I progress through my little narrative. Brujah player had received a bit of a nice haven. They're not living in a storage bin now anymore. They actually have like a semi-decent apartment. They still have the van from the sacrifice. They just have a bit more to play with now, so that's good for them. And then we moved on to Malkaivan player, who used their boon to basically wipe out all records of them existing, because Malkaivan player didn't want their stalker contact, there's an investigator that's trying to find them, and that they were aware of that through the Lasombra player, informing them. So they used that to have one of the hounds, Warneka, I believe is how the name's pronounced, the Nosferatu hacker dude, to basically wipe everything out. So that's good for them. But of course, Malkaivan player knows that could lead to even more complications, and I have some ideas for that, which I'll get onto later on. Now, we also then focused a bit more on the Malkaivan player, because again, if you remember the spoiler section, what happened next is that they had that dream sequence where they met Mr. X. I can't say their real name because that is a huge spoiler. Again, previous episode, upload, whatever. You can go and check that out, provided you're not one of my players. And Malkaivan player turned down the offer for they did not want to dispatch their sire, which I thought was a very interesting outcome. It makes total narrative sense given everything that's going on. But yeah, and once they turned down the offer, they woke up from their dream. Now, Malkaivan player responded by calling their sire over, and there was a bit of an awkward heart-to-heart sort of moment. I'm using heart-to-heart quite loosely here because it's a bit more accusatory, or however that fucking word's pronounced. Because if you remember last time, Malkaivan player found out a bit more about the cult that they're a part of through the means of their sire, and there's a bit of, doubt about the loyalty there, and, the sire's true to their word that, they're not intending to kill them, they're wanting to get out of it, so to speak. But, it sort of left things on a bit of an awkward note, because Malkaivan player's not quite too sure what to do with their sire, and I guess sire is now beginning to get a little bit cautious of their child, even with the blood bond in place. Now, you may be thinking, well, if there was a blood bond in place, surely there wouldn't be that much of a conversation. Well, that's where I'm going to introduce some rather spicy things later on. There's lots of spice coming up here now. So yeah, check out the spoilers for that. So then we moved over to the Abyss proper, where a lot of things happened. And like the previous thing, I'm going to be referring to my notes on my phone via a Discord server that we have, because it's been like 2 weeks since we did this and my memory's a bit patchy. So this is all going to be all over the place, basically, is what I'm saying. To start things off, the ghoul of the Lasombra player, Alex, has now been promoted as such to take on more managerial roles, doesn't just serve drinks, because they kind of need to. There was a big old conversation between the three of them, the three players, Brujah, Malkaivan, and Lasombra, in the office of the Lasombra player, which obviously belonged to their side, but it's now theirs. And there was a big conversation that primarily focused on the Brujah player, the spiky-haired individual that was staring up at them during the sacrifice, who I mentioned previously was the would-to-be sire of them, the other Lasombra, which my players, when they watched the part last time, didn't make that connection, and even though I was pretty sure that we had a conversation about it afterwards, so that was a very interesting reveal for them. But yeah, there you go, in case I wasn't clear enough. So there's a bit of a conversation about the notes and the things. They got out this photograph that they had, was a bit of artwork that the Brujah had done, which is really cool. That sort of hinted at they were being stalked by this person. It's clearly been stalked by some time, and how things just kind of marry up a little. Malkaivan player responded to this by trying to, perform a premonition. And the premonition alluded to lots of spoilery things I mentioned in the previous thing. There's a lot of reference to that because it all connects to ideas that I'm wanting to bring forward. But a lot of it obviously focused on the Lasombra individual who's clearly Sabat, who just is a fucking psycho, for lack of a better phrase, who got a bit of a buzz about torturing and killing people. And there was this visions of fire, and it ended with this big bestial growl, roar sort of thing. And because of the fire, I made the Malkaivan make a frenzy check. And they failed. We had a frenzy in the party. Now, granted, it didn't last very long because they very promptly controlled themselves with by spending a willpower. And I said that was enough just to end the thing because of how low the difficulty was. But if things got really heated, pardon the pun, sorry, that's just awful. It got really heated really quickly. The Malkaivan did not have a great time and sort of revealed that this is not a good individual. Bad things are going to happen. But despite this, and one really wholesome moment that I liked is that Lasombra and Malkaivan still wanted to try and help, sort out what was going on. They also were revealed by Brujah. I worded that awfully. The Brujah player revealed that they have this sire of theirs that's disappeared, and maybe they might know what's going on. There's a sort of connection there. But they wanted to try and help the Brujah try and figure some of that stuff out, which I actually thought was really sweet, especially when you consider how, prior to this, they weren't really working together as a coterie. They're sort of there by circumstance. The prince put them together. The Lasombra's was kind of being a bit sneaky with it, but they're actually working together now, and for a really helpful, nice cause to try and work out bits of their past. Now, of course, the player knows more about this, but they want to explore that with the group, which that's how this stuff works. And I absolutely love the chemistry there. That was just really sweet. And I just thought that to me was my favourite part because how nice they're all working together. It's in true anime fashion, the power of friendship. I wouldn't go that far though, but it was just nice seeing that moment happen. Now, shortly afterwards, Anita Wainwright made herself appear, wanting to talk to the Lasombra player, who, as I had predicted, the Lasombra player had worked out that they were talking about, or rather, they were going to frame things in such a way that they were talking about Genghis rather than the stuff that happened with Crook, and that's what Anita focused on. And the Lasombra player, who up until this point has sort of revealed all their cards all at once, was a bit more reserved here. Now, obviously, the Lasombra player doesn't know what happened to Genghis. Anita Wainwright thinks that they're responsible for their disappearance, which they kind of are in a sense. Lasombra player was kind of reserved of that, and Anita, being Elysium with a load of Camarilla kindred about couldn't really do much, but of course that's going to start off some rather interesting bits and pieces. And I'm curious to see how the rest of the coterie handles that. Oh, there was also a part of that after the session where the Lasombra player wanted to try and find out a bit more about the Ventru sire to be Maximilian Dorman, who wasn't at the Elysium, the Abyss, and to see if they can like set up some sort of Moala mentor sort of thing, which I found was a bit unusual given the circumstances, but I will happily pursue that. So what I said in the previous campaign diary got aged like fine milk, which is fine. Like, this isn't my story to tell. Like, I have a load of ideas, and all I can do is just like throw random shit at players. Well, seemingly random shit, and the players can give and take and do whatever they want. And they want to go and pursue that? Great. I think that's going to be very interesting and exciting, and I'm very curious to see what they can find out. They also actually wanted to try and work out who this Frank Vaughan was, which, cool. That's going to be rather interesting to pursue. And I can't wait to reveal that and see how they go about doing that. And of course, after the meeting with Anita, Crook shortly appeared, who had his ear to the door. And as I said in the spoiler section of the previous thing, they called off the boom because the reinforcements have been up around the haven because of that. And now Crook as a contact for the Lasombra, which everybody was kind of happy with. I think I made them a 2-dot contact because Crook doesn't have the greatest influence in the world, but he can find out things some of the time. And to that end, he was able to try and locate somebody who could set like tech and security for the Abyss, providing us favours, of course, which I'm introducing the character from Let the Streets Run Red, I believe it is, Gabriella, who is a Nosferatu hound, and if you know who that character is, I think they're a very interesting character, and some of the people that they know and how they interact with them, I think is very particularly interesting, knowing what I know about those other characters. And I do have plans of how to use Gabriella. Player knows they're a hound, because Crook was quite open about that, because I think the Lasombra player asked, do I revealed it, but in any case, there's another hound, so I'm just wanting to see how Lasombra player handles that. And again, I have many interesting ideas for that. Then there was the reveal from Kevin Jackson that Gritias was opening his schools of the neonates to be educated, and Brujah player received an invitation, and as we kind of expected was going to happen, and know why, Brujah player, was a bit defiant, and as I've mentioned before, they're kind of like coasting between the two sects, and Kevin is a bit suspicious about that, although it hasn't been mentioned yet. That's kind of the feeling that we're all getting here. But in any case, Lennox, who wanted a place in the Camarilla, Defy the Prince, is now being sent to the University of Chicago, which I had to do some research for recently, and Jesus fucking Christ, that place is big. Whenever I have to do research for Chicago about all the different places, I forget how fucking huge of a city it is. Just the very scope of it all, and then just looking how big the campus is for the University of Chicago. And by the way, what a gorgeous set of buildings that all is. I swear, it's like the whole fucking campus is bigger than the town that I live in the barely United Kingdom. Yikes on bikes. As a Brit, we live on a tiny island. I live on a tiny island, so I can't really comprehend, the scope of the US sometimes. It's just crazy, and I don't know whether the players have had to gone in their own way and research this, but when I reveal the certain pictures that I've collected for them and the fucking map on their website, the University of Chicago's website, that is, it is. I'm hoping it's going to create this sort of awe and wonder, because it's really gorgeous. The different buildings and whatnot, and the lecture halls, and just the library. Oh my god, the library! That's just something out of a fucking fantasy film. That's incredible. Good job, America. You actually made something beautiful. Although, that being said, there's going to be that one person in the comments is actually going to give me something really dark of how the whole thing came together, which, to be fair, if you can, do that. I want to be educated more about these things. I mean, there's always a catch with you naughty Americans. And after the whole encounter, that's where a lot of the conversation about trying to find out about the Brujah sire and the Lasombra sire to be for the Lasombra player happened. Sorry, the Brujah player happened. And there was also the conversation like what we should do sort of thing, because their conversation in the office was interrupted by a conversation with Anita. And the final real main thing that happened here that I want to share is that the Malkaivan player before the meeting with the conversation between the Lasombra player and the Brujah player is that they were sort of sitting about, and I made them do like Auspex check. I can't remember which particular power it is that allows you to like potentially see ghosts, but I made it aware to the coterie that there are a load of ghosts around, because if you remember, the sacrifice, the hounds went in and they just shot down a load of people. So there's a lot of ghosts around there now. There was actually quite a funny moment where the Malkaivan player went into the manager's office, the manager being the Lasombra player, and see if there was anybody else there, and they saw in the corner there were two ghosts making out, which everybody had a bit of a giggle, and everyone was like, yeah, good for them, which I thought was kind of funny. I had thought of having Crook just standing about there minding his own business, but I didn't want his reveal to happen like that, so I just moved it to later on, where I thought was a bit more appropriate. And the thing that happened there was the interruption with Anita, there was the interruption from Cook, and then was the third interruption where the Lasombra player was getting a bit, who is it now? And they open the door and it's Kevin. It's like, oh. So that worked nicely in my favour there. But yeah, the reason why I'm mentioning the Malkaivan thing is that after all of this had happened, they were introduced to a member of the Hakata, Harry Milliner. Now, of course, the player themselves knew the connection with Milliner and Vampire, but they did kind of okay, and they were sort of aware of the awareness of the Hakata, and they had a bit of a conversation that they seemed to be getting on rather nicely. And those who listen to the spoiler thing to know exactly what I want to do with the Hakata here. So yeah, that would be interesting. And I dropped kind of little things here and there. I don't think they worked out what I was talking about, they being the players. They'll probably go back and listen now to what I was talking about. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But either way, it's going to be fun. At least I hope it is, if I handle it nicely. And something that I missed out is that the Brujah player is also going to use this opportunity at Chrysias's lectures to see if they can find anybody that'll be aware of either their sire and / or the Lasombra that's been following them around. I can't remember if it was one or the other. I definitely remember it was to do with the Brujah, their actual sire. I think it was to do with them. There might have been the Lasombra as well. But either way, they're going to try and use this as an opportunity to try and locate, see if they know anybody who can work out what's going on. And I have some ideas what to do with that to make it kind of interesting. But that happens in the spoiler section, which has been orchestrated somewhere up here with a little crappy image that I've done. So, you know the rules. If you're one of my players, piss off. If you don't want any spoilers, also piss off. And check out the links in the description below for various Vampire the Masquerade books that you can purchase for your games. If you buy them using those links, I get some of the money back because I'm an affiliate. It's no extra cost for you, but it does allow me to provide you more lore dives, character creation guides, book reviews, and all the other stuff that you like me doing, usually, because that shit isn't cheap. And with that out of the way, let's carry on. Now, what do I want to do here after this? Now, obviously, the Hakata, as I mentioned, they are connected to the Joe Smith, the guy who had his head blown up by Genghis. I'm going to start dropping him in more in these sessions. There's probably going to be a conversation between him and the Lasombra, but I don't want to make it too overt that he is connected, that he knows that the Lasombra is involved with his departure. Because if I do that, then it's going to ruin a lot of things. Now, obviously, if the player puts 2 and 2 together and tries and works things out, sure, I will go with the flow of it, and, you know, the story will take a different turn. But I have to be careful how I want to handle this, because I want it to be like a big, emotional thing. And I have to play that right so I don't reveal too much. Brujah player, as we were talking about them just a moment ago, they're going to meet people, bunch of fledglings and neonates who are like really mucking and pissing about. Like, there's going to be people there who have never heard of the Masquerade. They're going to be Finbloods there. They're going to be Kaitif there, because the Brujah player made a point, you know, how unfair it was that the Kaitif and the Finbloods didn't get a vote at the sacrifice. I'm going to throw some of them at their way, and I want to see how they interact with them. But the person who I feel is going to be aware of the the Brujah sire, I'm going to have them as an Anarch Tzimisce, because if you remember, the Tzimisce in V5 are, well, the younger Tzimisce have defected to the Anarchs. Why? No one knows, and I don't even think the fucking writers know. I'm going to make it quite obvious that they're very, like, dressed in, like, stereotypical Anarch attire, like leather jackets and whatnot, and they're going to be bald, and they're going to have spikes down their head. And if they do a check for it, they can see that it's actually crafted out of bone, like, rather than being glued and stuck on, that it's actually their own bones. And I don't know what I'm going to have the Tzimisce do to reveal that information, because they're not going to reveal that information like that. It's going to be something risky. It's going to something that's going to make the Brujah player act more like an Anarch, to carry on this theme that I've mentioned before in some of the spoilers, like pick a side, like which one do you want to be? And I think the Brujah sire is going to be more akin to that. More Anarch than Camarilla. So this hopefully is going to set up some interesting dilemmas here, like which one do they really want to be with here? Do they want to follow off with the sire and like embrace the anarchisms, or do they want to stay with the Camarilla? They've really got to choose which one is more important for them. And what do I have planned for the Brujah sire? Well, the player and I had been talking quite a bit about, like, they embraced them and fuck off, but there is a reason for why they fucked off. Like, the Brujah player wasn't given permission to be embraced. And so there's a reason why they're able to live, sort of thing. The idea that I have, because Chicago by Night 5th Edition changes the meta plot somewhat, that Lodin, or Olaf Mad-Eye, or whatever it is, or Olaf One-Eye as he's called there, but Lodin isn't dead. He survived the attacks on werewolves, and now he just, like, hangs around the homeless, and he's just trying to build up his empire again, because there's, like, a letter excerpt, in Chicago by Night that, to Kevin, that makes him aware that Lodin is very much alive, and he's not happy with Kevin taking that spot, which creates lots of interesting drama for that. And I think it would be very interesting that the Brujah sire knows about this. Now, why that would allow them to be kept alive, I don't know. Or maybe, like, you don't kill me or something, I will not release this information. You won't see me in the city again, but that, that's the kind of the thing that I'm going with here. And I think Kevin put in a really fucking hard place here would allow that to happen, because he's desperate. Like, this could be, like, fairly recent into his reign sort of thing. Whatever. Something along those lines. I'm still trying to work out the finer details of it, of course, but I think that'll be a very interesting reveal, because they all know about Lodin. I've mentioned Lodin before. The Malkaivan player's been in the longest, so though she would definitely be aware of Lodin, met them on more than one occasion. So it's not like it's kind of a secret sort of thing. So that would be very interesting to reveal. Obviously, at a point, I want to introduce the Lasombra side to be, and I'm actually going to, like, drop them in more in this now. I had this idea the other day when I was walking my dogs, that maybe this Lasombra side to be has a pack that's the inverse of the player characters. So there is a Brujah who isn't very calm and collected, that they are very trigger happy, and they're like, they want to smash things up all the time. They've got, like, no control, which is different from the Lasombra side to be, because they get a thrill out of it, but they're a bit more collected, and then they're more Sabat in that way of thinking, rather than the Lasombra player who wants to be, like, retained onto their humanity. And then there'll be, like, a Malkaivan who as a theme for the stars and constellations a bit more, but for lack of a better phrase, a bit of a Fruit Loop. Not like the sire, who's a bit crazy, like, in terms of, like, relationship-wise, but this one is, likes flinging around a knife and whatnot, and makes people see stars or whatever. I haven't quite found out the time details with that. And also, the Malkaivan would be of a similar age range of the Malkaivan player. And when I say that, like, how they look, because the Malkaivan player looks like a late teenager, I might have that Malkaivan player the same age or a bit younger, so it just makes their antics a bit more, holy shit, they're really screwed up sort of thing. But again, similar to how I mentioned with Nikolai in the previous spoiler, because of the age thing, I have to play that one carefully. If players find it a bit too upsetting, I'll just, like, rage the age group a little bit. Because I don't want to upset the players. Like, characters, yeah, fine, let's, like, give those characters lots of trauma, but not the players. Like, I don't want to upset the players. I've already done that once, and I don't want to do it again. And even then, that's just a misunderstanding, and everything's okay with that now. But what about the Malkaivan player? The idea that I want to have with that is that I want that premonition from a couple of sessions ago where they saw their sire try and devour them. I do not want that to be connected to the cult, but I do want that to be connected due to their, like, relationship, that because of this encounter and other things that are probably going to be happening now, that this blood bond is going to slowly weaken because the sire is not going to see the child as much. They're not going to help them out as much. They feel that they don't trust them and try and control them that way. And if the Malkaivan doesn't reciprocate to, like, oh, if you're not going to give me the attention I want, I'm not going to give you any at all, sort of thing. That if it doesn't push them to, like, wanting to spend more time with the sire, it's going to break them apart, which is going to make the sire pissed off, which might put them in a state of a frenzy, like having all those emotions boil to the surface. Because remember, it's not just fire and sunlight that can cause a frenzy. It can be, well, obviously a lack of blood or being extraordinarily hungry, but it can also be a lot of emotions as well. And I feel that if handled correctly, this relationship that's got really tense on the verge of exploding could cause a frenzy that way. With the Malkaivan player, I want that investigator to come up more now because because all of the records are gone, that's going to cause a bit of suspicion. It's like, hold on, I've been tracking this person for ages. I know they're in this city, but I can't find anything of them, so something's at work here. So now I'm going to have to go to higher places, which is going to introduce hunters and the Second Inquisition, which is probably going to introduce that stalker background to the Lasombra, but at least that's what they think is going to happen. Because what I want to happen is start to introduce werewolves a bit more. That was the roar and the growl that I mentioned earlier on, hinting at the presence of the guru in the city, that they are coming. Specifically, the Black Spiral Dancers. And that's who the stalker is going to be for the Lasombra. A Black Spiral Dancer homid. And there's going to be a bit of encounter about that. And the Lasombra player is probably going to extract all the information from them, either with all their use of words, presence, or just with Dominate. I think using it with Dominate will be quite the surprise, because, like, obviously Dominate would allow them just to find out exactly what is going on without dancing around it. And hearing the word Black Spiral Dancers, the characters won't have a fucking clue what that is, but the players are like, oh shit. And it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. And I do want an encounter with the dancers in a more dramatic sense. I have this idea of whoever's leading it, a Krynospawn, which you may know as Metis, but I prefer using Krynospawn because Metis is, in this sense, is a bit insensitive. So I'll be using Krynospawn here. So like a Krynospawn, like a suit, he wears barefoot, got like ram horns sort of going on, a bit of a psycho is all they tend to be. But that could be further down the line. I don't want to talk about too much just yet because I'm still trying to work things out. But going back to the Malkaivan player, so there's going to be the introduction of hunters. Probably they're going to be meeting their doppelganger, for lack of a better phrase. There's going to be more dream sequences that's going to hint towards the arrival of the Sabbat and the Black Spiral Dancers, because they're going to have them work together again for like a second war of Chicago. And I feel all of this is going to happen at roughly the same time. Like the frenzy, the war, like all this different stuff. So the sire like loses their shit. So the premonition will come true, but just not in the way that the player had intended it to be. And it'll be the player themselves who has brought on the prophecy. And again, I need to be careful how this is handled, so this hits the way that I want it to. But of course, if the player wants to do something completely different and does things I don't expect, I'm obviously going to always gear towards what they're going to do. Always. I'm not going to railroad them like this at all. But it'll be very interesting to see how they all react to all the different things I'm going to throw at them. And I think that is actually all that I've got at this time. So if you've enjoyed this, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. If you want to, if there's anything that I'm missing out, obviously the players can let me know in the comments below, because I'm sure that'll make the listeners and you lot enjoy, and some insights or whatever, because I know some of you have been leaving comments, which is rather cool. If again, as I mentioned before, if you want to experience Chicago by Night 5th edition in your games, or using some of the materials that I've used. You can check out the books in the description below. You purchase them using those links. I get some of the money back at no extra cost because I'm an affiliate there, and I'm able to provide, more lore dives and character creation guides and so on and so forth. And I am really excited for our next session to see some of these fragments and things come into play. And and I can't wait to tell you more about it. And as of the recording of this, our next game is in 3 days' time, so that's going to be lots of fun, I am sure. And until next time, farewell.